Hello, folks. Hello, Phil Weirden again.
Hello, Rohan.
Good to be with you again. We are doing like 1.5 weeks of recordings today, and this is the first of those, isn't it? So, good to have you back. We as we record this, it's only a couple of weeks after our 2 Samuel one released, 2 or 3 weeks after that, and we actually on that night we recorded. We were in October now. It was way back in late August or something, probably.
Yeah, definitely August.
Yeah, definitely August because we actually recorded the second part of the second week. So we're going to have you for the next 2 weeks of episodes, the next 10 episodes. So hopefully we'll record 7 tonight. We start like at 4:30 in the afternoon, so it's a long night. As this week goes on and into next week, if we get vaguer and vaguer, you'll understand why.
Yeah, might get to the last chapter. We might just say read it yourself.
Read it yourself. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we're going to record 7 to 11 today for this week's episode, and then we're going to record Hebrews 12 and 13 for next week's episodes. And then we've already recorded the back half of next week's episodes, Romans 1, 2, and 3. We recorded back in August. So we just thought we'd hold all these Hebrew ones together and hopefully our brain will half function for them.
Go with the flow.
go with the flow. So Hebrews 7 today. I know just a week or two ago I recorded Hebrews 2 to 6 with Jeannie. We touched on Melchizedek, but we didn't get very far because he really gets released into the story in a bit more depth here in this chapter, doesn't he? So
he does.
So where do you want us to go? Hebrews 7 as we kick it off.
Yeah. When I was reading it, it was like in one sense, it was like I wasn't sure how much had you explained Melchizedek beforehand.
Well, we only touched on it because we sort of said from memory. We said, look, we'll deal with it in chapter 7 with you. Yep. So go for it. Tell us about this Melchizedek dude because. Not only is it a good name for a rock band, it's also a real guy, Christian rock band.
I'm just sort of thinking of but Melchizedek sounds more of a heavy metal.
Heavy metal, it's a Christian heavy metal band, I reckon for sure. Yes, that's for sure. But so who was this bloke? Or if you wanted to call him Mel, that sounds. Call him Mel. All right.
Mel, he was a king of this place called Salem, and it's not Salem's Lot.
No.
Sorry, that's a Stephen King sort of
Correct.
reference. So,
yep, a Stephen King reference.
Yeah. So king of Salem, which ultimately was a place called Jerusalem.
Yes, Salem became Jerusalem. Yep, that's right. Same place.
Yeah. So
long time before that, but yep.
No, this is when Abraham was around. So Mel's only mentioned a couple of times in the Old Testament.
Yes, he's mentioned in the story of Genesis.
Yeah.
In this one obscure passage when Abraham returns from rescuing Lot and gives Melchizedek a tithe. He's mentioned once in Psalm 110.
Yep.
Where it says about the Messiah, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, and then it goes silent until the book of Hebrews. That's it.
Yeah. Or I think there was...
Or is there another reference?
It could be another reference, or whether it's within the Psalms.
I thought it was just Psalm 110. I thought that was the only one I mentioned. I may be wrong.
I could be. Anyway, you guys can find that one out.
You can look it up yourself. Yeah. I was about to do it, but no, that's all right.
Yeah.
Pretty sure. Yeah, there might be one.
It's only
other
a couple of times,
yes.
So it's really obscure. This,
especially to build an entire doctrine on, which we're about to see happen here.
Yeah. So he's this king that and priest.
Yes.
And it says priest of God Most High in verse 1. So how do you become a king and a priest at once when the Aaron line was like this, all priests, and the king line of the Jews was from Judah? That's
right. That's right. That's the argument he's building here. So he's saying, just for our listeners, he introduced Melchizedek a couple of chapters ago, and he's explaining, the writer, he or she, we don't know, of Hebrews who the writer is explaining how Jesus is in many ways like Melchizedek. And scholars argue about whether that means Melchizedek was actually Jesus prior to, a pre-Old Testament epiphany of Jesus. I think the general consensus now is that's not the case, that it was just that the writer to the Hebrews is using the Melchizedek story as an example. So this Melchizedek was a priest king. It says he was it says he was the king. Was it say king of Salem and priest of God Most High, or El Elyon, God Most High? So there was a sense in which, somehow this priest worshipped Yahweh is what is assuming it takes place here. Worshipped God at the same time as Abraham, had some relationship with God, was greater than Abraham in some way because Abraham gave him a tithe.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's who this is. And once you get to Moses, years later, 500 years after this or 600 years after this story, God, as you said, splits the authority lines, the royal line and the priestly line into two different tribes, Levi and Judah. So that's how your question was, how do you get it? Well, Melchizedek, you don't get it after Moses until Jesus. But what it's doing here is it's pre-Moses.
Yeah.
Back before we had Moses, and there was a priest and a king who were the same person. And so that's what the author's dealing with, isn't he? He's going down that path, trying to say, hey, there's precedent for this thing of a priest being, because he's just said in Hebrews chapter 4, Jesus is our great high priest.
Yep.
And he's talking in other chapters in Hebrews about Jesus being our king. And people are going, well, how is that possible? You don't have a king and a priest together. And he's going, let me show you that actually you do have a king and a priest together a long time before Moses was on the scene. And that's why he's explaining who Melchizedek is and how Jesus is like him.
Yeah. And the other, from I'm going to say a Christian perspective, is Melchizedek wasn't a Jew or Israelite.
Correct.
He was before Abraham was called. And so from a Christian's perspective, Jesus was like for the king and the priest for before. So it's not like we're isolating the Jewish Israelite people culture or the genealogy.
Or the high priest person. Yep, that's right.
So that anybody can go to Melchizedek as the king and priest sort of thing and worship and
pay tithes
and do all the
and honor him as a king.
Yep. And the reverence and sort of thing without having been what's the word? Not isolated. Secluded. What's the word? Not secluded.
Separated.
Separated is just okay. It's only just for the Israelite Jewish sort of.
Which is often what Jews thought. You know, the Jews thought they were special and elite, and they had the rights to worship, and their whole system of worship through the high priest was the way to go and all that sort of stuff. And that's what this writer to the Hebrews is trying to break down. He's trying to explain this not just for Jewish. You Jews aren't the only ones. Yeah. God has a plan for the Gentiles too. And this book is written to Jewish Christians throughout the empire who were facing the temptation of going back to Judaism because this Christian thing was starting to get persecution and they were starting to not be able to buy and sell and do other things. And because of that, some of them were going, oh, look, it's a whole lot easier to go back and be Jewish again. And this book was written to say, no, don't, just hang on. Yeah. Stay to your faith. Let me show you how Jesus is greater than Moses.
Yep.
Jesus is greater than the high priest. Jesus is greater than the angels. Actually, we're doing backwards, but this is the early chapters of Hebrews, explaining Jesus' supremacy. And this is all part of this thought, is Jesus is better than the high priest. Don't go back to that. Yeah. The high priest actually points to Jesus, not the other way around.
Yeah. And the other good thing that whether it goes through these chapters 7 till the end is that Jesus, with his ultimate sacrifice of himself, is more than what the priests were, who could only do from the physical outwork, the body image of the animal sacrifices for the earthly temple. But Hebrews goes on to talk about, well, that's a mirror image of heavenly
temple. Real temple in heaven.
Of the real presence of God.
Yep.
And that Jesus is in the real presence of God on our behalf. And so it's like, that's...
Why would you go back to that old empty shell when you could have the real thing? Yeah, that's right.
So it's amazing when you read it and you look at it and you listen to what the words are saying. It's so much more than just the legalistic I have to do it in steps A, B, C, D.
Yeah, that's right.
I can only do, clean the cups in a certain ritual, or what's the holding on to the 613 or 17 Mosaic laws that some people sort of think, well, I have to do steps A, B, C to get to heaven. Whereas Jesus is like breaking that down, saying, I don't need to do that.
No, I've defeated that. Now you can fulfill the law.
Yeah.
Love God, love your neighbor. But you do that through my defeat of sin rather than you having to earn favor with me through obeying 613 rules, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, well, I think we can close the night now.
You reckon that's it? We've done.
Over.
We'll have an early mark. Sorry, folks, we're missing out. No, I'm just kidding.
Nah. So
The one thought that comes out that he says there is he's talking to Jewish, remember, he's talking to Jewish believers as we read through these chapters who are thinking about going back.
Yeah.
And he's trying to say, look, don't go back. And he actually gives the example of, when you pay your tithes to the priests, when you go and give your tithes at the temple, this Melchizedek actually received tithes from Abraham, but actually received tithes from Levi, the priest family as well. Yeah. So in a sense, because Levi it says he was in the loins of his grandfather at the time, is what it says. You know, he was to come. He was a descendant. So in that sense, his argument is you can be paying your tithes to the priest, or you can pay your tithes to the priest king.
Yeah.
And so when we pay our tithes as Christians, I pay my tithes, you'll pay your tithes. We're not paying our tithes to me, I'm the minister or whatever. We're not paying our tithes to the church or to the entity. We are paying our tithes to the priest King Jesus in the same way that Abraham offered the priest. And it says the Melchizedek received a greater blessing. He was blessed more than he was able to bless.
Yes. It says that in verse 7. It says, without question, the person who has the power to bless is always greater than the person who is blessed.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
So that's why we pay tithes, because we pay them to Jesus in this way, fully aware that we could never outgive God, that what we have received in blessing from the priest King Jesus is far greater than what we give him. Nonetheless, just like Abraham was grateful to what God had given him and paid tithes to Melchizedek, we pay tithes to Jesus because we're grateful for what Jesus has done for us.
That is true. That is true.
Maybe a bit about what it says the priesthood changed. Maybe that's worth mentioning. Which is about verse 12 or something like that. Oh, it's verse 11. It says, so if the priesthood of Levi on which the law was based could have achieved the perfection God intended, why did God need to establish a different priesthood with a different order of Melchizedek instead of the order of Levi? So when this is not priestly order, it was like family generational, all through Levi, all the way down. And he's saying that priest, all that Moses stuff, all that temple stuff, it was good, but it wasn't perfect.
No.
It was never going to deal with sin. It was going to cover sin. It was going to keep you pointing in the right direction, but it was always pointing towards the fact that you needed someone more than that. You needed a greater sacrifice than what that system could ever offer. And that's what God is saying. To bring perfection, he had to completely shut down that order and start a new one.
Yes. Yeah. I read that he was like, as you said, that it was good, but it was a temporary measure.
Yes, temporary measure.
And Jesus had to come to shut it all down, to say this is not enough.
Yep.
There's a little bit more.
Once and for all, Jesus died. Rather than going through this priestly motion all the time, why would you go back to going through the motion of trying to win favor with God through temporary sacrifices when Jesus has died once and for all?
Yeah, so it's because he explains it through Aaron and the line of the Levites. They were chosen by the genealogy, that nobody else could do it. So it had to be the high priest could go into the temple one day of the year to perform the sacrifice. But he had to, sacrifice for his own sin, but also for the sins of the people. Whereas it's saying, well, this Melchizedek and Jesus he was chosen by God.
Yes.
God sort of plucked him out. And
he didn't have to be born from the line of Aaron or the line of Levi.
Yeah.
God chose him and appointed him.
Yeah. And it's a different one. It says there that Christ is a priest forever in the line of Melchizedek, which is Psalm 110 verse 4. The old requirements of the priesthood were set aside because it was weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect, but now a better hope has taken its place, and that is how we draw near to God. And God took an oath that Christ would always be a priest, and he never did this for any other priest, because he says, the Lord has taken an oath and will not break his vow, you are a priest forever, which is quite a big statement.
It's a big statement for the Lord to make that oath. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's because Christ died for our sins and he offered himself as that sacrifice. That's why he is a priest forever.
Yep. Eternal
Priest.
I wonder if, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, well, just reading there, verse 24, it says, Jesus remains a priest forever. His priesthood will never end. Therefore, he is able once and forever to save everyone who comes to God through him. He lives forever to plead with God on their behalf.
I love that promise of this eternal mediator, this eternal high priest that's there, that is standing in the gap, that has done the job once and for all, and we're available. I mean, I don't think any of us are running the risk of facing hard times and thinking, oh, this Christian thing's all too hard. We might go back to the temple and start sacrificing animals again and eating kosher. You know, I mean, that's not really us as been raised as Gentiles. That's not in our thoughts. But I don't think that means that we should exclude the message of this chapter, which is still there. I mean, I've met lots of people who go, this Christian thing's all too hard. Oh, maybe if I just back down a little bit. I just won't go to church as often. Oh, maybe I won't get as involved, or maybe I won't contribute financially. It'll be a whole lot easier and be much more comfortable if I don't do those things. And the temptation to resort to the old way, even though our old way might not be temple sacrifice and Mosaic temple sacrifice, resort away from or turn away from Jesus or dial down the passion dial on our relationship with Jesus. That's the temptation we face. And it's just as real and just as prevalent in our world as it was to these Jews, thinking they would go back to what they knew. We have a tendency to go back to what we know. And I think, therefore, a chapter like this that reminds us of the supremacy of Jesus over all other things. Yeah. Because we might not worship the altar of Moses in the temple, but we can worship at the altar of Netflix. Yep. Chilling out, we can wrong words. We can Netflix. We can worship at the altar of shopping, spending money, food, or you name it. We can worship at all those altars, and all of those altars are inferior to this eternal Jesus that we should worship at, and that's what Hebrews is encouraging us to do. Stay the course. You will not regret it. We have a high priest who is blameless, unstained by sin, and has been set apart from sinners and given the highest place in heaven. Why would we not want to?
Yes.
Stick to that one. That's what he's encouraging us to do.
And I'm sort of then reflecting on like, we're not supposed to judge other people and where they're at with their walk with God. And I know over the years I can picture myself thinking like, well, why isn't that person walking with God anymore? Or why is that person not on as coming to the church 6 nights a week and like as a real Christian
should. Yes.
But it's not our place to judge and that sort of thing. And it's like, well, how do we worship God?
Yep.
And the new Christians are so on fire, or like that word, so on fire or so. Yeah, they act.
The passion dial is up.
Yeah, to 110%.
Yeah.
And then it's like I've sort of over the years as being a Christian for a few years, I've sort of worked out it's not a 100-meter dash.
No,
Life is not a 100-meter dash. It is a marathon.
Yeah. Better to run the passion dial consistently high as opposed to burning yourself out. And then what happens is I've seen people who just go 110% and then they're nothing. I think it's better to be solid, consistent in your faith. Just keep turning up. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows, but stay faithful. Keep giving to Jesus. Keep tithing. Keep doing those 1% as well. Yeah. And you will grow. And that's what the writer is encouraging these Jewish Christians to do. Just stay the course. Hold in there. So he uses a whole bunch of different points in chapter 7. I'm just looking at chapter 8, which we'll do tomorrow's episode. He like sums it up and he goes, okay, I've said all that. Now here's the main point. So he's building his argument in chapter 7, isn't he?
He is. He's sort of, as we said at the beginning, he's sort of, this is for the Jewish Christians.
Yes.
And so a lot of this is the Jewish culture, talking about the priests and the temple, and which we'll go into.
And I said this on the episode with Jeannie. We don't have the advantage. We have to put it this way. We have to do the homework with the book of Hebrews because we don't necessarily naturally know all of the Old Testament connotations and references that are being used. But to Jewish Christians who've been steeped in this, they get it intuitively. So we need to do the honor of doing the homework to understand the arguments, because it's an argument based on an assumption that when he quotes things, the listeners ought go, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But we look at it and go, wait, what? We don't know what you're talking about. So we have to do that work, to figure out what, dig a little deeper to find out what the point is.
Yeah, especially when you sort of think, well, okay, talking about sacrifices, and it's like, well, I must be if you were a person who had never been to Sunday school and never been to church, coming along and trying to read this, you'd be going...
You would be going, wait, what?
Yeah. And it's like sacrifices, so like pouring out your blood for on the altar is like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
I'm not doing that. No, that's right. So that understanding, homework, but we do the right thing by the authors and the original listeners to honour that and do that work. Does make it a little bit more complicated for us because we're separated by 2,000 years and half a planet, but we owe it to them to do that. Rather than try to put it into our context, we need to put ourselves in their context.
Yeah.
And it makes a whole lot of sense. And I said this with Jeannie, I think it's actually not a complicated book.
No.
Hebrews has this view of being regarded as highly complicated, but it's mainly complicated. Its main complications come from the fact we don't understand the Jewish story behind the book. Once we get a better handle on that, take your time to do that. And the one way, if you're brand new and you want to start at the book of Hebrews, it's just to do it really slowly. And every time you see an Old Testament reference, just go back and read that Old Testament reference. That might be enough for today. You might want to pick it up again for another couple of days.
Yeah.
Do it again. But eventually you'll get a handle on the Old Testament, and then the book comes to light a lot more. And it's not a complicated book. It's just literally saying Jesus is better than angels, so why worship the angels? Jesus is better than Moses, so don't worry about the law of Moses. Jesus is better than the high priest, so stick to him, worship him. Don't go back to the old ways. That's essentially what he's kind of saying. Jesus is better than the Sabbath. All the other thing he'll say. Jesus gives the ultimate rest. Yeah. So stay with Jesus. That's the whole story of Hebrews. So we can go home now.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else in chapter 7 you want to draw your attention to?
No. The only, this following on with your point is like the number of Christians who don't know the Old Testament, don't know the culture and the it's lifelong learning.
Yes, we're still learning, yep.
But it's how, unfortunately, we're all guilty of it, where we take something of the New Testament and we apply that to our today's world, and it's like they're actually off base.
Exactly. We can't, let alone do it with the Old Testament. That's another level again, but we try to do it with the New Testament. But the New Testament world, although it's closer in many ways to our world, they understood elementary democracy and so on, it's still radically different to our world today. Yeah. Even though it does mention the Roman Empire. I was talking to Adrian about it on the last episode and asked him about the Roman Empire, and it's actually coming up for a few weeks' time. But I was just chatting with Adrian Schlosser about it, and he said it reminds him of the joke of how often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Yes.
I said, I think about the Roman Empire multiple times a day. I'm one of those guys. I'm always thinking about it because the New Testament world is saturated in it. Yeah. So anytime you think New Testament, you're thinking Roman Empire. And you've got to give the benefit of understanding that you're going to get most out of the New Testament when you fit in that context, understand that context. And here we're being asked to understand the Jewish context, which is very different to ours.
Yeah, well and truly.
Yeah.
Go to Israel and you'll definitely find the totally different
culture in many, many ways. Just don't go to Israel right now.
No.
All right, that's enough for today.
Yeah.
We'll go on to chapter 8 tomorrow. We'll talk to you then.
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bible. Wait, what? Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And you can also find us on all the socials. Just search The Bible. Wait, what? And to find out more about our church, just search C3 Camden, C3 Picton, or C3 Thirroul on the web or on the socials. Thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you on the next episode of The Bible. Wait, what?